Hello everyone, Mark is my name, and I am 29 years old. My extended family gets together annually for a large Thanksgiving feast at my aunt and uncle's place. We meet together just a few times a year, an opportunity to catch up, have dinner, and preserve family ties. At least that is what it once was. But this year, everything was different. And my cousin Megan set everything in motion. Megan's 27, and for as long as I can remember, she has always been the family's golden child, beautiful, effective, and naturally charming. She is the one everyone consults for guidance. She is the one who receives most attention at family get-togethers. I never really cared about it. After all, I was not fighting for that attention. But this year, something quite different happened. You know, the inheritance question surfaced a few months ago following the deaths of my grandparents. Given their somewhat large estate my grandparents had left behind, it was not long before disagreements emerged. When Megan and her mother, my aunt, fell short of their expected entitlement, they were enraged. To them, it was more than just the money. It was a personal attack on them, evidence that the family didn't value their contributions. The reality is, my share in the estate was meager, just like the others. That did not stop them, though, from assigning me blame. Neither had I participated in the split of the estate, nor in the allocation of the assets. But Megan, with her natural tendency for causing difficulties, started to imply that I had some bearing on the distribution of the money, not all of which was also. No, the real problem began when Megan contacted me a few weeks ago, inquiring whether I may loan her some money to settle her credit card debt. Now, Megan and I were not exactly close. We shared family gatherings, but beyond that, there was no personal connection. I was therefore surprised when she abruptly asked for a loan overrun. It was more than just the money. It was the assumption that I would just turn over without thought. However, I did not. I graciously turned down, explaining I wasn't in a position to give her the cash. And at that point, everything started to go apart. Being Megan, she found it difficult. She started swiftly disseminating rumors about me on the family chat. She said I just thought about myself, that I was selfish, that I didn't care about family. I seem to have somehow turned into the villain in this story, when she was the victim. The worst of all is also thought to have my back. My folks began to support Megan. Not only did they not defend me, but they also showed no effort to hear my perspective. It seemed as if a betrayal. Like I stopped even being a member of the family, until I received a call from my Aunt Linda, who informed me unequivocally that I had to apologize to Megan if I wanted to be part of the Thanksgiving feast. I had no idea how far Megan's words had traveled. The family was offended, she added, and my failure to assist Megan had started off pointless conflict. She warned me I wouldn't be asked to Thanksgiving if I didn't apologize. To be very honest, that really touched me. One event I eagerly awaited was Thanksgiving. That was the one occasion we were all together. But I was being thrown aside now since I refused to lend Megan money. Still, the apology request went beyond simple polishing to cover. It was about yielding to Megan's control. Megan wanted an apology since she was in the wrong, but instead of owning up to her behavior, she wanted me to ask for pardon. I never intended to do that. I couldn't let her believe she could stroll all over me. A few days later, when I ran into Megan at the grocery store, the matter descended upon us. She yelled right away as she saw me from across the aisle. She blamed me for separating the family and said I had destroyed their holiday plans. She was loud and theatrical, and those gathered around were staring. Said another way, it was embarrassing. But what really got to me was the knowledge that she had the audacity to hold me responsible for her own behavior. That was the mental turning point. I had not been planning to ask for a table seat. I refused to allow her or anybody else to determine my value. I hence decided. This year I was not planning to celebrate Thanksgiving. I wasn't going to be part of a family get-together when I wasn't desired, where my presence was conditional. It turned out not worth it, and perhaps it was time to stop pretending things were normal. If they couldn't grasp that, I shared this with my parents. I advised them I would not be there, though deep down I felt it was the right call. They urged me to reconsider my opinion. Thanksgiving, as I knew it was over, my seat at the table had been removed, and I wouldn't force myself into a scenario where I felt unwelcome. That's how it all began. The beginnings of what would turn into a holiday I will never forget. A holiday marking the demise of the family I once knew for all the wrong reasons. Things just kept spiraling out of control once I chose to miss Thanksgiving. Initially, I assumed that by just pulling myself out of the circumstances, everything would diffuse. I could not have been more mistaken, though. Funny how life turns out like that. You believe that withdrawing will provide others time to calm off, see things from another angle, but often it simply increases conflict. And that is exactly what transpired. Megan took little time disseminating her interpretation of the narrative. She started texting relatives, explaining that I was the one driving all the conflict, claiming that I had left her when she most needed me. She portrayed herself as the injured victim. This was obviously a fake, but I knew it wouldn't really matter. People follow their own desired belief. Family members began messaging me, challenging me, wondering why I couldn't simply pardon her and put things right. A few cousins even gave me calls saying, "Mark, you've always been the quiet one, the peaceful one. Why are you exaggerating about this so greatly?" It angered me greatly. Not one of us was exaggerating anything to create a huge show. When someone asked for money I wasn't ready to give, I had simply said no. Suddenly, though, Megan was the martyr, and I was the enemy. I had been painted into a position where the only choices seemed to be the greater person, to make nice, and to apologize. I was unable to achieve it, though. Apologizing would only serve to confirm her conviction that she could control me anytime she chose, and I would not allow that. I felt more isolated the more people reached out to me. I began asking things like, "Why are you torturing the family over a loan? This is a simple misunderstanding. Don't make it worse." But the truth is, it was more than just the loan. Megan's actions were not a one-time occurrence. There was no straightforward misinterpretation here. This was a recurring trend. She has done this with other family members in past times, using guilt to get what she desired, manipulating, gaslighting, and yet, for all these years I had been blind to it somehow. It seemed as though nobody was really listening when I tried to explain myself and offer my side of the narrative. Megan's story had already seized hold, and I was merely throwing boulders in a torrent already headed downstream. The most annoying thing to me about people is that they don't even seem to give the facts any thought. Their only goal was for everything to return to normal. They yearned for holidays and serenity, the picture-worthy events, free from recognition of the fractures developing under the surface. Damn, it was quite taxing, trying to defend my choices to others without understanding, trying to persuade them I wasn't the one who broke rules. The guilt visits began to arrive hot. "You're going to throw off the family dynamic," they would advise. Consider the whole picture. The greater picture, though, was that I was worn out, playing the family scapegoat position, of constantly giving in, of always sacrificing, of always assigning blame, bored me. This was not an isolated argument. Years of feeling ignored, discounted, and useless came together here. When would I ever be able to speak up for myself if I could not right now? I then dug in my heels. I kept my will strong. I vowed not to participate in any more debates or backtracking that would just cause me to doubt my own sanity. I told myself, I'm not going to apologize to maintain the peace. My entire life, I have been doing that, and it has brought me nowhere. Their issue stemmed from their inability to perceive me defending my own self-respect. Still, I knew the storm was far from finished, even with all the opposition. Megan refused to let this go lightly. Her entitlement had, if anything, just become more pronounced. She had already started to map her next action. My Aunt Linda gave me a call a few days later. More disturbed than I had ever heard her, she said, "Mark, you really ought to give it some thought. Over this, the family is disintegrating. You have inflicted a great deal of hurt. Healing will take time." The guilt trip was really in motion. For the good of the family, my aunt persisted in urging me to swallow my pride and apologize. She could see, though, that by apologizing, I would be betraying myself. I would keep being trampled over if I kept putting the needs of others before my own. It went beyond Thanksgiving these days. It was about grabbing hold of my life and decisions. That was the end of it. I informed Aunt Linda I was not celebrating Thanksgiving. Her voice betrayed a disappointed tone that stung, but I had decided on this. I was not going to let anyone shame me into acting in knowledge of knowing it was not appropriate for me. My parents were still caught in the middle, divided between helping me and not wanting to aggravate the other members of the family anymore. Still, they did not grasp. They didn't understand why I couldn't simply follow the flow, as I always had. They didn't know that I couldn't continue living my life believing everything was good while it wasn't. Enough of the way things were going I had seen. Others were suffering as well, not just myself. Though they were too afraid to speak it, several family members had also begun distancing themselves from Megan. Some of them had even told me they agreed with my choice, but nobody wanted to be the first to stand firm. It dawned on me then exactly how much Megan possessed inside the family. She had spent years controlling everybody around her, and now I was the one who had at last stopped being in awe of her games. Still, things were not going to be simple from here on out. I understood that the worst still had to wait. Thanksgiving arrived, and along with it, the expected consequences of my choice. Surely I skipped, but the reality of what I had done really began to sink in as the day wore on. I was missing something more than simply a holiday, something that had been a pillar of my relationship with my family for years, not just a custom. The idea bit me like hell. The evening had been a complete fiasco, my mother informed me when I eventually called her the next day, and listening to her say it stung, even though I knew in my heart it was for the best. Megan had created a great drama, a spectacular show about how I was spoiling everything, she told me. My mother claimed Megan had even spoken at the supper. I could see the theatrical, over-the-top performance along with the poor me routine, the kind of speech that would make everyone regret her and make me the villain, even though I had done nothing illegal. It apparently did not stop there. Megan continued on how family should be about love and loyalty, how she couldn't understand how I could be so selfish and damage her like that. Though we were not remotely close, the irony of that was not lost on me, this coming from the same person who tried to control her way into accepting a loan from me. That side, though, was not observed. To everyone else, she was the misused, poor, confused cousin. Finally having enough was Duncan, my uncle. Apparently driven by irritation and a bit too much alcohol, he got up in the middle of the supper and summoned Megan out. He noted that she was the one who had started the issue, not me. She was manipulating, her arrogant attitude, her conviction she could run the household. She had been the one to create the distance. Not me, he made plain. Naturally, though, that just served to exacerbate problems. Megan objected politely to being called out. Originally meant to be a happy event, the dinner descended into an all-out argument. Plates were hurled, voices were shouted, and my Aunt Linda, the peacemaker, found herself caught in the midst attempting to calm everyone. I realized that my presence, or lack thereof, was going to impact the entire family regardless of what I accomplished. Either Megan was creating anarchy, or I was bringing drama. There didn't seem to be a midway, and the family talks. Oh, that detonated in the aftermath. Messages were sent back and forth for hours, some of them angry and others trying to seem as though things were simply fine and that everyone should just move on. The reality was, it wasn't fine, and everyone else could see that as well, not totally blind. While some members tried to contend that I should have just given Megan the money, maybe things wouldn't have gotten out of hand if I had only done the right thing. Others were obviously on Megan's side and used excuses for her behavior, but from what standpoint was the right thing? Was it the correct thing to let her rule the family, let her control me, let her get away with behaving as though she was entitled to my money and time, simply because we were family? No, I am unable to doing that. Though first overpowering, I knew deep down it wasn't me who needed to change. I wasn't the one acting irrationally, so the pressure to apologize and take responsibility for something I didn't do was intolerable. The toughest aspect of all of this was witnessing my parents divided between the two sides amid the anarchy. My mother persisted in attempting to calm things down and begged me to apologize so things can return to normal. My dad, on the other hand, said nothing, but I could see the displeasure in his eyes. Not wanting to lose the family dynamic either was another motivation. The truth is, though, I didn't want to participate in the familial dynamic involving frequent belittling, manipulation, and neglect. I wanted to stop acting as though everything was fine when it was not. I told my mother the following day that I had not regretted my choice. Though I knew she wanted me to back off, I stayed strong. If I had apologized to Megan, things would have returned to Megan always getting her way, always playing the victim, always gaining sympathy while everyone else suffered in silence. I choose not to participate in that. Naturally, Megan was not done yet. She continued to post passive-aggressive, cryptic remarks on family loyalty and treachery on social media. She clearly mentioned someone, but she did not specifically name me. I knew that was her aim all along. She wanted everyone to view me as the evil man. Her need to shape the story was something she would never give up on. Hence, the more she posted, the more I realized, being the object of her manipulation, the center of her rage, and the villain in a narrative I didn't even want to be a part of, was draining. I could not, however, back down. I could not let her triumph. I just really acquired clarity that Thanksgiving, I knew, maybe for the first time, how poisonous my family had grown. Not just Megan was generating the issues. There was a culture of allowing her to get away with whatever she wanted because of the family card. I lost the ability to play that game. Realizing that the entire family had to adapt instead of just me made the toughest aspect also clear. But as the dust settled, I discovered that I felt unusual relief. I finally felt free, even though I was not at the dinner table or part of the holiday celebration. I was not caught in the anarchy anymore. I could start fresh. I didn't have to appear as though things were good when they weren't, or live under the shadow of someone else's machinations. This was the start of a different chapter, in which I would not be sorry for defending myself. Even so, it meant forfeiting my seat at the family table. Thanksgiving arrived and passed, but the consequences of my choice to skip stayed much longer. The family ate without me, a meal Megan somehow managed to set the stage for her drama. Mom contacted me later to fill in, and to be honest, it seemed like real-time listening to a train crash. The whole thing had collapsed into anarchy. Megan produced a scene as expected. She had written a moving speech on family unity, interspersed with some disguised slights directed against me for separating the family. She said I didn't appreciate family or the years we had lived together, and in terms of delivery, simple theater. With the entire audience in the palm of her hand, she persuaded everyone that I was the villain in a tale I had not even participated in. But the story grew more convoluted when Jeff, my uncle, found it impossible to remain silent. Rising from his seat, he pointed out that Megan had been driving all the trouble, beginning with the inheritance drama and extending to her attempts to influence everyone into sympathy for her. Someone has the bravery to speak up at least. Though little, it was a minor triumph among the sea of strife, and then things truly heated up. The dinner table descended into a battlefield. The entire room felt as though it was suffocating. Voices were raised, and accusations were flung about like confetti. As they typically do when a family is split, people started picking sides. Some supported Megan, standing in for the victim in all of this. Others began to doubt her motives after realizing what was happening, including Uncle Jeff. It was messy. The repercussions simply got worse after supper. Usually a source of amusing updates and memes, the family group chat turned into a battlefield for sharp words and acrimony. Megan had everyone persuaded me was the one who had spoiled the family reunion. She kept sending passive-aggressive notes, accusing me of being selfish and of not understanding the value of family. Still, this is the important thing. Nobody appeared to give a damn about Megan lying about me to hide her own guilt. Nobody gave a damn about her trying to guilt-trip me into giving her money, or about her actions generating more drama than the inheritance conflict could have ever produced. No, their priorities were maintaining peace at the table, something that looked more significant than really tackling the underlying cause of the issue. Still, I was not about to say apologies. Not for something I did not do. Not for attempting to run my life with some sort of ethics. I therefore stood strong, but I was doubting everything in the rear of my mind. How did this come to pass? How had Megan managed to have my whole family turn against me simply because I said no? My mother phoned once more a few days later. The news this time was far worse. Megan had declared her intention to engage. Except for me, naturally, the family was thrilled. I was offended as well as not shocked when I discovered I was not invited to the wedding. Now it was abundantly evident that this was not about the Thanksgiving feast alone. Megan was sketching on the sand a line. She was declaring that I didn't match her picture of an ideal family, and that I wasn't in her life. Though the absence from her wedding was not the most stinging, Megan had managed to influence everyone else, including my parents, into thinking that I was the cause. Everyone else seemed to agree with her painting of me as the villain. Knowing the facts of the matter, my parents were too afraid to face her squarely. They could more easily pretend nothing had happened and let it slip. The toughest component was realizing they were silently supporting this. Then Megan's fiancé messaged me, just when I felt things couldn't get worse. It threatened. If I stopped talking about Megan, or dragging her through the mud, he informed me, they would think about legal action for slander. They seem to think their threats may scare me into quiet. To be very honest, I had no idea how to react. It had less to do with the threat of a lawsuit. It concerned their belief that I would back down. Like they had been doing with the rest of the family, they believed they could harass me into compliance. But at that point, something changed in me. I came to see that defending myself required no apologies. I had no necessity of crawling back to ask for a table seat. Megan was the one who tried to have the whole family turn against me. She could keep playing her games, but I was going to be a pawn no longer. Over the course of the days, I began to get calls from a few family members apologizing. They admitted they had begun to see the reality, and they were sorry for accepting Megan's falsehoods. Some even said that her manipulation of them over the years had been years. Although their cadeau was appreciated, it did not undo the already done damage. It was not only the treachery that wounded. Megan realized she had been manipulating everyone around her, causing them to turn on anyone who got in her way for so long. I stopped wanting to participate in that. I wanted out of her game, not to be a pawn. A few weeks later then, the truth emerged. Someone who had usually stayed out of the controversy, one of our relatives, disclosed something that stunned everyone. Megan apparently borrowed money from other family members throughout the years without returning it. It was like the floodgates opened. People suddenly came to see she was not the angel they had assumed she was. She had been abusing the family's goodwill, using their love and allegiance against them. Her fiancé, too, began to withdraw himself. Once he knew the truth, he wanted no involvement with her drama. It was amazing to see Megan's well-constructed picture of perfection starting to crumble. Still, it was not the end. The person who had first called me to demand an apology, Aunt Linda, at last came to her senses. She phoned me, really apologetic. She said she had let Megan's actions go for far too long and had been too eager to side with her. She said she should have listened to me sooner. Though little, it was enough to make me feel as though I wasn't totally alone in this disaster. About Megan, her participation was called off. Her falsehoods and trickery had caught her backtracking. Along with most of her surviving family support, the wedding meant to bring us together was called off. Although knowing the truth had at last emerged felt good. More than that, it felt like the start of something better. There is no more family strife or faking. I was not going to live under the shadow of another person's manipulation anymore. The holidays arrived and disappeared without incident. Certain family members started organizing smaller, more private meetings, devoid of Megan, and I came to see, maybe for the first time, that peace was feasible. I felt valuable without having to participate in every holiday custom. I led my own life, surrounded by friends, and carried my values. For me, that was more than plenty. I continued thus. Megan, too? She had to face the results of her deeds, though. I wasn't sad for her. I felt absolutely nothing at all, in fact. Her obligation then came first, not mine, and I wouldn't have it any different. The days following Thanksgiving seemed to be a tempest never completely past. I could feel their judgment pressing down on me as the family carried on talking about what had transpired. Megan had almost turned practically everyone against me, and I felt like an outcast in my own family. The messages kept arriving, the subdued jabs from cousins and relatives, all asking why I couldn't simply move on from the circumstances. They were saying, and I knew what they meant, why couldn't I simply do the part I had always filled, the quiet one, the one who followed everything everyone else wanted without inquiry? But I had released myself from that. I was not planning to return to the status quo. In all of this, even with the anguish, there was an unusual sensation of release. I had quit trying to satisfy everyone. I had quit attempting to maintain calm at the price of my own happiness. But Megan wasn't finished yet. She was still working to shape and control the story, and this time she was not disguising her methods. She had begun confiding in others that I had been spreading lies about her, that I had tarnished her name. I found the irony of it all not lost. She was the one lying to everyone for years, but in her rendition of the tale, I was the villain somehow. My mom called one afternoon. She begged me to see her, clearly agitated. "Mark, you have to fix this. Megan has lost it. She's telling people you're destroying her life." It was as though my mom couldn't understand that Megan herself was the only person damaging her life. Still, I knew better than to have this kind of talk. Every time I tried to defend my viewpoint, it seemed as though I was speaking to a stone wall. Still, I consented to see her. I reasoned perhaps, just perhaps, I could reach her. My mother looked strained and nearly desperate when I got to her place. She started right away talking about how I had to atone. "Mark, I cannot keep fighting with everyone," she remarked. "All I want is for things to return to normal, not like you here." I stared at her, my irritation boiling under the surface. "Mom, what exactly does get back to normal mean?" Originally, Normal was what drew me here. Normal is Megan walking all over me right now. Normal is me serving the family's drama as the punching bag. I cannot return to it. My voice broke with passion as I spoke the words I had been storing inside for years. Her facial expression relaxed, but she still didn't understand. You have always been the quiet one, but you cannot simply desert the family for something like this. Family is supposed to remain close regardless of all else. At that point, I thought perhaps my mother and the rest of the family would never grasp. They wanted me to do what was simplest, what maintained calm, to simply meet their expectations. But that tranquility was really a brittle fiction, kept together by silence, compliance, and terror. I had spent too many years fearing conflict and being reluctant to upset the peace, but now I could see that avoiding conflict was not shielding anyone, least of all myself. "Mom," I responded gently, "I'm not deserting the family. I am shielding myself. I cannot continue to act for the benefit of everyone else. For years, I have been the one to compromise, but these days, it is not worth it." She delayed her response right away. Rather, she merely watched me as though she were seeing me for the first time. She seemed to grasp it, or if it was merely the weight of disappointment hovering over her, I couldn't tell. In any case, the talk had no effect whatsoever. Megan was not stopping, nor was I. I started hearing more and more from family members, beginning to see the truth as the days passed. Some of them, especially the quiet ones earlier, contacted us personally to show their support. One relative acknowledged that she had been on Megan's side out of concern about losing her position in the family. Another informed me she had never spoken out, even though she had felt uneasy with Megan's behavior for years. Like me, they all claimed to have been manipulated, and now they could see Megan was playing them all. To be on the receiving end of apologies and admissions felt weird, almost bizarre. These were folks I had formerly considered friends, people I felt would have my back covered no matter what. And now, it seemed as though they were at last atoning for years of complicity. I wasn't sure if I ought to be happy or resentful. Ultimately, where had they been when I most needed them? Why had nobody spoken forward before? Shaking the belief that I had been left to fight this war alone for far too long was difficult. Megan wasn't performing either in the meantime. She continued to make threats, to create rumors about me, and to present herself as the victim in all of this. Her fiancé jumped in, sending me harsh messages, urging me to stop talking badly about Megan or face legal action. Really? That was embarrassing. Megan had spent years manipulating the family for her own profit, and now, when the truth started to surface, she wanted to play the victim. It was like a twisted game to her, one where she always won and everyone else lost. But throughout this period, something evolved in me. I had ceased caring about her. I stopped caring about her falsehoods, her manipulations, and her attempts to control the narrative. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Free from the guilt, free from the weight of family expectations, free from the pressure of trying to satisfy everyone. The more Megan shouted, the more I realized that I had made the right option. I was not going to let her pull me back into her web of falsehoods. I was going to refuse to allow her to control my life anymore. Megan had no going back from her actions, as they had revealed her true self. Over time, I began to reconstruct my life outside the turmoil she had produced. I concentrated on the people who really loved me, those who saw the real me, not the one Megan and the rest of the family had tried to shape. I didn't need their approval. What I needed was peace, and I was finally starting to find it. But Megan still had one more trick up her sleeve, and I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. After Thanksgiving, things sank into an eerie stillness. Megan's attempts to revive the drama became background noise. I refused to let her drag me back in. It was challenging at first, watching her continue to distort things on social media, but I realized that dealing with her would only bring me down. I had made my choice, and I wasn't about to let anyone trick me into feeling guilty for sticking up for myself. I started hearing from certain relatives, folks I hadn't expected to hear from. Aunt Linda, for instance, called one evening, her tone contrite. She realized she had been wrong to support Megan for so long. "I see now, Mark. Megan has always been the problem," she added. "I was blind to it, but not anymore." It felt nice hearing that. It didn't undo anything, but it was a start. Then there was Ethan, quiet, restrained Ethan, who'd always stayed neutral. He texted me one day, acknowledging he'd made a mistake by not speaking out sooner. "You were right all along," he wrote. "I should have known better. I appreciated that." It wasn't about being right, it was about truth, and it appeared like the truth was finally getting out. Meanwhile, Megan kept trying to play the victim. She wrote continuously, trying to cast me as the villain, but no one cared anymore. The individuals who had once gathered behind her now knew her for who she truly was. Her wedding was a fiasco. The man she was intended to marry left her after realizing the truth about her continual borrowing and manipulations. As the year went on, my family began to recover. It wasn't ideal, and not everyone came to their senses, but it felt like we were finally starting to rebuild on healthier foundations. Megan's drama had caused us all to rethink our relationships and what we were ready to endure. For the first time in years, I felt free. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I could focus on the life I was making for myself, without the weight of others' expectations. And as for Megan, my story no longer included her. I had turned away and was not turning around. That was the toughest part over. Time came for us to advance.